Hello, I'm Bretton, one of our MCAT tutors here at Inspira Advantage, where we help students get accepted into medical school and other professional programs. And welcome back to another episode of MCAT Bites. Today we're diving into the essential biochemical concepts of anabolism and catabolism, building and breaking. These processes are crucial for understanding how our bodies manage energy and build or break down molecules. By the end of the video, you'll have a clear grasp of these metabolic pathways and their significance in the human body from a top-down view. This is going to be very helpful for both the Chem Phys and Biochem sections of the MCAT. Truly, these concepts are tested in some form or another, around 20 points on the MCAT. So we want to make sure we absolutely understand metabolism, and that means understanding catabolism and anabolism. So let's start broad here with what is metabolism. Metabolism refers to all chemical reactions that occur within a living organism to maintain life. These reactions are divided into two categories: anabolism and catabolism. Anabolism involves building complex molecules from simpler ones, which is being shown here on the right. It's taking energy to do this. Whereas catabolism is breaking down food typically, or big molecules, into energy and some cellular building blocks. These are our macromolecules: glucose, proteins, nucleic acids. And if it's a protein we're breaking down, it's going to break down even farther into the most basic building block, which, as we know, is an amino acid. Anabolism is a set of metabolic pathways that construct molecules from smaller units. As we briefly mentioned, this process requires good old energy, aka ATP. So this means we typically will be using the mitochondria for anabolism, though we don't need it necessarily, right? Because we could still do glycolysis in the cytosol. Anabolic processes are responsible for the growth and differentiation of cells and the synthesis of vital molecules such as proteins, nucleic acids, and lipids. Examples of anabolic reactions include protein synthesis from amino acids and DNA synthesis from nucleotides. Now, let's look at protein synthesis in detail. The process begins with transcription, where DNA is transcribed into mRNA inside the nucleus of the cell. The mRNA will then travel to the ribosome, where it'll be translated into a polypeptide chain. Poly means many, peptide is peptide. It's like a little protein chain. Each amino acid is going to be brought to the ribosome by something called tRNA, this little guy with the hat. tRNA will match the codon on the mRNA. So each tRNA has a unique signature. So this blue one, it's CAC, and that's going to bind to the complementary strand on mRNA, which is G. And we'll go into more depth on this later, but really we just want to keep it high level right now. And this should be mostly review. To hammer this home, the three key steps for anabolic pathways are: first is the monomer activation, which is where small molecules are activated using energy. For example, during glycogen synthesis, glucose molecules are phosphorylated to form glucose 1-phosphate. The second is polymerization. These activated monomers are going to be assembled into larger molecules. In glycogen synthesis, glucose 1-phosphate molecules are linked together by glycogen synthase to form glycogen. And then finally, we have the final assembly, which are when these polymers are then modified and assembled into final structures. For glycogen, branching enzyme creates a branch structure, making it more efficient for storage and release of glucose. And we can kind of see those steps over here. So our monomer activation is happening right here, and then we're polymerizing, and eventually final assembly with branching enzyme. So now we'll turn our attention to the other, and I think more fun side of metabolism: catabolism. We're going to break it down. Catabolism involves breaking down complex molecules into simpler ones, the opposite of anabolism in pretty much every way. It's going to release energy that can be used for various cellular processes. This energy is also often stored in the form of ATP. Catabolic reactions include glycolysis, where glucose is broken down to pyruvate, which is being shown on the left here. We start with glucose and move down to pyruvate. Can then enter the citric acid cycle, where acetyl-CoA is eventually oxidized to produce ATP in the mitochondria. During glycolysis, one molecule of glucose, let's look at the very top here, is converted into two molecules of pyruvate. This is because when fructose 1,6-bisphosphate is broken into dihydroxyacetone and glycerol aldehyde 3-phosphate, it's being cut in half. So we have both of these 3 carbon chains turning into pyruvate. And if we look at the bottom here, we see that we are making some ATP. So we're getting 2 ATP there. If you remember, we also got 2 ATP up here. So that gives us a total of 4 ATP, or a net of oopie doop. Boop! Delete that last part. Ooh. During glycolysis, one molecule of glucose is converted into two molecules of pyruvate, yielding a net gain of 2 ATP and 2 NADH molecules. This process occurs in the cytoplasm and does not require oxygen. Pyruvate can then enter the mitochondria, where it's converted into acetyl-CoA, which enters the citric acid cycle. And in the citric acid cycle, acetyl-CoA is oxidized to produce ATP, NADH, and FADH2, which can then later be used in the electron transport chain to generate additional ATP using oxygen. So what are the three key steps in catabolism? Well, first is we're breaking down a large molecule. In this case, it was glucose. And then typically we'll have oxidation. These simpler molecules are going to be further oxidized to release even more energy. Fatty acids undergo beta oxidation in the mitochondria to produce acetyl-CoA as well, very similarly to this glucose story. And then finally, there's going to be some form of energy storage. So the energy is going to be released during catabolism. It's captured and stored as ATP or other high energy compounds. The acetyl-CoA produced from beta oxidation can then enter the citric acid cycle to actually generate this ATP. Finally, how is this regulated? Well, the body finally regulates anabolic and catabolic pathways to maintain energy balance and meet physiological needs. You don't want too much anabolism or too little catabolism. Both result in death. So how do we regulate this? Well, hormones. For example, insulin promotes anabolic processes like glycogen and protein synthesis, while glucagon stimulates catabolic processes such as glycogen breakdown and gluconeogenesis. In a quick review, insulin is secreted in the pancreas's alpha cells in response to high blood glucose levels, and it facilitates the uptake of glucose by cells and stimulates the storage of glucose as glycogen in the liver and muscle. It also promotes the synthesis of fatty acids and proteins. Conversely, glycogen, which is produced also in the pancreas but in beta cells, is secreted when blood glucose levels are low and stimulates the breakdown of glycogen into glucose in the liver, raising blood glucose levels, as well as the synthesis of glucose from non-carbohydrate sources in gluconeogenesis. Let's go through 3 example problems to make sure that this is clicking. First, now let's do a couple example problems to make sure that we're understanding everything. Beginning with problem 1. If a cell needs to produce a large amount of ATP quickly, what metabolic pathway would be most active? Anabolic or catabolic? Take a few minutes to think about this. Giving you the answer in 3, 2, 1. Well, the cell would activate catabolic pathways. It needs to break things down for energy, such as glycolysis and a citric acid cycle. We need more ATP, so we've got to break stuff down. For our second question, how does insulin influence metabolic pathways in the body? I want you to tell me broadly what insulin is doing. Or I guess tell yourself. Take a few moments to think about this, talk out loud, write it down, whatever works best for learning. Give you the answer in 3, 2, 1. Insulin promotes anabolic pathways. It encourages the synthesis of glycogen, fats, and proteins, while inhibiting the breakdown of these molecules. It facilitates the storage of energy in the form of glycogen and fat, while promoting the uptake of amino acids for protein synthesis. Broadly speaking, anabolism time. It's building stuff. And now finally, this is something I see on the MCAT all the time, testing this understanding. A patient has low blood glucose levels. What hormone would be likely to be elevated, and what metabolic process will that hormone stimulate? Take a few seconds, think about this one. I'll give you the answer in 3, 2, 1. Glucagon would likely be elevated, and it would stimulate catabolic processes such as glycogenolysis, so that's breaking down glycogen into glucose, and gluconeogenesis, which is the synthesis of glucose from non-carbohydrate sources, all with the ultimate goal of increasing blood glucose levels. Understanding anabolism and catabolism is essential for mastering metabolism and energy management in the body. Anabolism is building up, using energy to construct complex molecules, while catabolism is breaking down, releasing energy by degrading complex molecules. Together, these processes maintain the delicate balance of energy and resources necessary for life, as well as making sure you get a ton of questions right on the biochem and chem-phys sections of the MCAT. Thank you so much for watching our video on anabolism and catabolism, and I will see you next time.